him in person if what he said was true the night before, and he said it was. He started crying a little bit and said he wishes he hadn't done it.
What's going on?
September the 11th. Exactly 24 hours after the Charlie Kirk incident triggered a massive FBI investigation, Tyler Robinson is violently pacing the floorboards of the St. George apartment. Tyler Robinson is leaving behind a complex trail of forensic evidence that is currently complicating the entire judicial review. Tyler Robinson has just allegedly executed a highly coordinated fatal event. But sitting directly across from Tyler Robinson in that cramped living room, observing every single breath, is Lance Twiggs. Lance Twiggs is the former associate, the current roommate, and the ultimate procedural anomaly in the prosecution timeline. From the very beginning, something about this dynamic has felt far too orchestrated for two ordinary roommates. The mainstream media is feeding you sanitized courtroom highlights, but a network of open-source intelligence analysts and behavioral profiling communities are tracking a very different narrative. Independent forensic teams have isolated a critical communication log. It is a timeline of digital evidence that simply does not align with the physical reality of a lone suspect. I will break down this exact forensic timeline in this investigation. Because once you see the digital footprint fracture with your own eyes, the established legal narrative begins to unravel. How deep does the true knowledge of Lance Twiggs actually go? And what happens when the star witness of the Charlie Kirk hearing is secretly managing a completely different agenda? The legal apparatus wants you to believe the Charlie Kirk incident was a spontaneous, chaotic tragedy. The prosecution wants you to stare blindly at the Tyler Robinson preliminary hearing, listen to lead investigators like David Hall, and accept the spoon-fed narrative that Lance Twiggs is simply a shocked and horrified bystander. But today, we are stripping away the courtroom theatrics to look directly through an objective lens. We must analyze the first block of evidence. Look closely at the raw, unedited footage of Lance Twiggs sitting on the witness stand before Judge Tony Graff. Do not listen to the audio. Watch the biological baseline. The autonomic nervous system cannot mask a cognitive shift, and Lance Twiggs is displaying severe signs of it. Notice the sudden downward eye movements when the prosecution asks simple baseline questions about the St. George apartment address. Notice the hyper-accelerated blink rate. These are the exact physiological markers that occur universally when a human being is rapidly fabricating a sequential memory rather than retrieving an authentic one. When the prosecution asks Lance Twiggs if Tyler Robinson ever discussed the Charlie Kirk motive, watch the exact fraction of a second where the lips of Lance Twiggs compress into a tight, bloodless line. High-level behavioral analysis refers to this specific lip compression as the physical suppression of withheld information. The brain is aggressively signaling the mouth to physically shut. If Lance Twiggs is simply an innocent bystander, why does the biological baseline scream that this witness is operating in absolute survival mode? The prosecution truly believed they had engineered the ultimate procedural win. They put Lance Twiggs on the stand to deliver a deeply emotional testimony. Lance Twiggs described Tyler Robinson pacing around the St. George apartment, crying and expressing deep regret. The tension in the courtroom of Judge Tony Graff was absolute, feeling like the definitive conviction for Tyler Robinson. But right as that emotional peak hits the courtroom, right as Lance Twiggs flawlessly paints the portrait of the traumatized associate, the entire psychological facade shatters. Lance Twiggs deliberately spoon-fed the court this weak, emotional narrative as a highly calculated decoy. By handing the prosecution the tears and the erratic pacing, Lance Twiggs successfully deployed basic counterinterrogation tactics. This diverted all investigative scrutiny away from the reality of the St. George apartment history. Lance Twiggs gave the prosecution a surface-level confession of guilt so investigators would immediately stop digging into the deeply radicalized political motive. This level of psychological deflection requires extensive training. It requires an intimate understanding of how investigators build a narrative. If Lance Twiggs willingly surrendered the emotional aftermath of the incident, what significant ideological secret is Lance Twiggs desperately sacrificing Tyler Robinson to protect? Now we must stack the next block of evidence and analyze what did not happen. In forensic investigations, the absence of normal human behavior is often the most damning evidence of all. We must weaponize that absence. Behind the locked doors of that courtroom, A digital purge is quietly happening across encrypted forums. Advanced open-source intelligence networks have detected a massive scrubbing of digital footprints connecting Lance Twiggs to the ideological circles surrounding Tyler Robinson. Lance Twiggs testified under oath that a friend sent an Instagram link regarding the Charlie Kirk incident in a private group chat. And then, looking dead into the eyes of the prosecution, Lance Twiggs stated that they simply did not really look into the news at all. That statement is a major behavioral red flag and a statistical forensic impossibility. No human being on Earth receives a breaking digital alert that their own roommate is the prime suspect in the high-profile incident involving Charlie Kirk and decides to just ignore the notification. No frantic internet searches. No terrified phone calls to family. No immediate interrogations of Tyler Robinson. The human survival instinct demands immediate threat assessment. Every piece of this puzzle has an innocent explanation in isolation. Perhaps Lance Twiggs was simply tired. Perhaps Lance Twiggs was distracted by daily routines. But when accepting the innocent explanation requires you to ignore the entire sequence of human biological responses, it stops being the most likely answer. The forensic discrepancies indicate Lance Twiggs was actively monitoring the fallout in real time, actively constructing a phantom narrative of total ignorance. If Lance Twiggs truly ignored the breaking news reports, how did Lance Twiggs already know exactly what physical evidence Tyler Robinson was frantically running from? This brings us to the jurisdictional red flag that the mainstream media completely ignored. You are watching a masterclass in procedural manipulation, a tactic known in intelligence circles as weaponized ignorance. Before Lance Twiggs ever sat in that witness chair, high-powered attorneys secured a highly specialized use immunity deal. Use immunity is not handed out to innocent bystanders. Use immunity is demanded by individuals who know their own digital footprint is entirely compromised, often guided by external legal architectures far beyond a standard public defender. Lance Twiggs refused to speak to the prosecution until they legally guaranteed that nothing said on the stand could be used for a federal prosecution. Lance Twiggs is not a cooperative witness helping the state. Lance Twiggs is a cornered operative building an impenetrable legal firewall. By securing use immunity, Lance Twiggs legally trapped the prosecution in their own jurisdiction. Lance Twiggs can now selectively omit, manipulate, and filter every single detail of the St. George apartment timeline, and the state has zero power to prosecute based on those admitted conversations. This is not a confession. This is a high-stakes negotiation disguised as a witness testimony. Are you starting to realize who is actually controlling the Charlie Kirk courtroom? The system built a perfect wall of deception, but the digital timeline exposes the fatal flaw. It is time to look at the primary evidence. Deep investigative threads have isolated the exact chronological anomaly that shatters the entire prosecution. On September 10th, the day of the Charlie Kirk incident, while actively fleeing the scene, the mind of Tyler Robinson is allegedly pumping with massive amounts of adrenaline. In this state of extreme physiological panic, Tyler Robinson supposedly picked up a mobile device and sent Lance Twiggs sprawling paragraphs of hyper-specific forensic details, even referring to Lance Twiggs as my love. This is where the logic of the prosecution completely fractures. Tyler Robinson supposedly transmitted a digital log of chilling evidence to Lance Twiggs right after the fatal event occurred. Yet the very next morning inside the St. George apartment, Lance Twiggs swears under oath that Tyler Robinson went into zero detail about the crime. And even more critically, Lance Twiggs displays absolutely zero emotional connection to the suspect during the testimony. The roommate who received text messages reading my love sat on the witness stand completely devoid of any romantic or emotional distress. The contradiction is absolute. Behavioral science proves that a fleeing suspect seeks immediate psychological offloading, but deep web forensic communities are tearing this timeline apart. Why would Tyler Robinson, a suspect intent on carrying a dark secret to the grave, meticulously document every operational detail in a frantic text message while evading a massive police presence? Why would Tyler Robinson confess via text, only to suddenly go completely silent and vague in the absolute privacy of the St. George apartment? And more importantly, investigators have documented that the timeline of those text messages aligns dangerously close to the moment Tyler Robinson was stripped of all mobile devices by authorities. If Tyler Robinson was already compromised or separated from the mobile device, Who actually sent those detailed text messages to establish a digital alibi? The text messages allegedly sent on September 10th are entirely inconsistent with the physical reality of the St. George apartment meeting the very next morning. When the prosecution asked about political discussions, Lance Twiggs utilized intense linguistic qualifiers, stating under oath that they personally never heard Tyler Robinson talk about Charlie Kirk specifically. Personally. Specifically. These are the exact calculated linguistic gymnastics of an operative terrified of committing perjury while actively managing a massive cover-up. We have seen the highly structured legal defense. We have seen the coordinated digital scrubbing. We have seen the deployment of use immunity to silence the timeline. This level of operational security points to a reality far darker than a lone suspect and a clueless roommate. It means the entire Tyler Robinson prosecution is actively being anchored and manipulated by an external network operating entirely in the shadows. The roommate is not just a cooperating witness. The roommate is the ultimate firewall. Lance Twiggs is acting as a psychological handler who successfully engineered a flawless exit strategy while using Tyler Robinson as a disposable asset. The established legal system relies entirely on your silence and your blind acceptance of their carefully edited courtroom highlights. The prosecution needs you to stare directly at Tyler Robinson and ask absolutely zero questions about the behavioral baseline of Lance Twiggs. But the forensic anomalies can no longer be ignored. I need you to look at the massive gap between the detailed text messages of September 10th and the silent hours inside the St. George apartment. One piece of evidence holds the key to this entire operation. Tell me exactly what you think the unreleased cell tower triangulation data reveals about the true location of that mobile phone when those final text messages were sent. Was Tyler Robinson even holding the device, or was the digital alibi manufactured from a completely different location? Drop your forensic analysis below, because we are using your intelligence for the next phase of this investigation.